Today, we'll be taking a journey through three of England's most notorious haunted pubs. From claims of guests being scratched, to the terrifying tortured souls of murder victims, you do not want to miss the last pub on this list. So, grab a snack, dim the lights, and prepare for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul. The Olde Salutation Inn, Nottingham. It's thought that Nottingham as a settlement dates back to the 6th century. With this in mind, we shouldn't be too surprised that hundreds of stories about the various ghosts that haunt the city have been passed down through generations. From ghostly goings-on at Wallerton Hall to the National Justice Museum, Nottingham's rich history lends itself to some really creepy tales. But when it comes to places in this city that you might not want to be left alone, especially in the dark, the Olde Salutation Inn is right at the top of the list. The Olde Salutation Inn, nicknamed The Sal, is a Grade II listed public building, with parts dating from around 1240, which lays claim, along with the Olde Trip to Jerusalem and the Bell Inn, to being the oldest pub in Nottingham. The Sal also has a claim to being the most haunted pub in the entire country, one landlord having asserted the presence of 89 separate apparitions. Aside from these claims, the Sal is best known for its rock music and has been described by local historian Dave Mooney as an old-fashioned rock and bike pub. Many pubs across the country are linked to the odd ghost story or two, but according to locals, the Sal is in a league of its own. First of all, it's worth noting that parts of the pub date back to the 12th century, and the original structure was built over the city's cave network. Perhaps the pub's most infamous resident ghost is that of a young girl who went by the name of Rosie. It's said that in the 19th century, Rosie, a local flower seller, was struck by a carriage out in the pub's courtyard. With Rosie seriously injured, she was taken down to the cave network beneath the pub to receive treatment until a doctor arrived. Sadly, Rosie's condition deteriorated quickly, and she succumbed to her injuries before help arrived. In the weeks and months following Rosie's death, guests at the pub started to report the sensation of being scratched by unseen hands, as if by a child. The superstitious landlord at the time believed that Rosie was responsible for the scratching, and took a doll down to the caves as a gift for her. Miraculously, it was very soon after this that the scratching incidents seemed to stop. Staff and guests still leave toys down in the caves to this day for Rosie's poor spirit, to give her some comfort. Publican Jason Weston speaks of the hauntings of Ye Olde Salutation Inn. He said, "One very sceptical former landlord didn't believe in the spirit of Rosie at all, so he removed all of the toys from down in the cave. This proved to be a costly mistake. That very same night, all of the beer in the kegs down in the cellar went stale. Since then, nobody, including myself, dares to remove Rosie's toys from the cellar." The pub is also said to be haunted by 3 former landlords, all of whom went by the name of John. The first John hung himself upstairs in the inn. The second John fell down the stairs in the cellar, breaking his neck. The third John was a former landlord who went by the name of John Green, who accidentally poisoned himself and his family with arsenic, trying to deal with a rat infestation. Fortunately, John's family survived the ordeal, but John wasn't so lucky. John's spirit is said to haunt the pub's cellar, closely watching anybody who works down there. Jason said John is fastidious about the cleanliness of the cellar. If it's not maintained to his particularly high standards, he'll start slamming doors and throwing items around the cellar. My very first encounter with him was not long after I moved into the pub. The cellar was in dire straits and needed a really good clean out. I spent about 18 hours down there altogether sorting it out. At one point, I briefly popped upstairs. When I came back down, there was an old pint glass sitting on the floor directly in the middle of the cellar. I was absolutely certain that I was the only person that had been down there. On one occasion, I'd forgotten to close the door on the way back up from the cellar. I jokingly shouted, "John, close the door for me, please." And at that moment, the door slammed shut. Other hauntings at the pub are said to be that of a pirate who drowned while hiding in a well, a highwayman whose ghostly apparition can be seen manifesting around the bar area, and a legion of Roman soldiers who can be seen emerging from one wall, then disappearing through another wall on the other side of the pub. These days, the caves below the Olde Salutation Inn are occasionally visited by groups taking part in the Nottingham Ghost Walk. But what do you think? Is the Olde Salutation Inn really haunted, or are these just stories spun over centuries? If you're ever in Nottingham, it might be worth paying a visit, either to experience the history, or maybe to encounter one of the pub's resident ghosts. Jamaica Inn, Cornwall. The Jamaica Inn is a stunning 18th century coaching inn situated on the borders of Bodmin Moor. The inn is well known for its history as a resting place for smugglers, but it's perhaps most famously known as the location for the novel by author Daphne du Maurier. When you consider that the inn is steeped in such rich history, it's little wonder that guests and staff alike have reported countless ghostly encounters at the Jamaica Inn. The inn was used as a temperance house in the early 1900s, but there has always been a consistent level of paranormal phenomena present at the inn throughout the centuries. Popular paranormal TV show Most Haunted, presented by Yvette Fielding, recorded an episode at the Jamaica Inn and described it as one of the spookiest places they'd ever visited. On a moonlit night, you might just hear the spectral sound of horses' hooves and the metal wheels of carriages colliding with cobblestone in the courtyard outside the inn. Any attempt at locating the sound will most definitely be met with disappointment. Disembodied footsteps have been reported on many occasions in the corridors outside the bedrooms. Upon investigation, the corridors will be completely empty. Other reports have claimed that the spirit of a man in a hat and cloak will often appear out of nowhere, startling guests before disappearing through closed doors or solid walls. More than one of the previous managers of the Jamaica Inn have reported hearing the sounds of foreign languages being spoken throughout various areas within the inn. Would this be the dialect of the old Cornish language? Who knows? There have been many years of ghostly reports originating from the inn, which recently prompted an investigation by the Ghost Society. They found that there were several areas within the inn that were rampant with high levels of paranormal energy. The most prominent areas in the inn were the stable bar, the smuggler's bar, the restaurant, and bedroom 4. The Jamaica Inn, Cornwall's legendary coaching house, which was immortalised by Daphne du Maurier's novel of the same name, has stood high on Bodmin Moor for over 4 centuries. Set in one of the most breathtaking locations in Cornwall, the Jamaica Inn welcomes locals and travellers alike. So, why not stop off on your way to some of the county's attractions, like the world-famous Eden Project, and Falmouth's National Maritime Museum. Who knows, you may even get a glimpse of one of the Jamaica Inn's famous resident ghosts. The Ostrich Inn, Slough. Situated on the main high street in the village of Colnbrook, Slough, is an inn that many regard as the most haunted pub in all of England. However, it's not until you enter the car park at the rear that you appreciate the size of this building. As you look closer, three main historical periods are evident, as the inn grew in size over the years. Even with the thunderous roar of aircraft passing overhead from nearby Heathrow, it's easy to get a feel for the age of the building. The pub itself dates back to the 15th century, but it was built on the site of an even earlier hostelry, founded as far back as 1106 by Milo Crispin. The Ostrich Inn, a corruption of the word hospice, was to be held in trust for the good of travellers in this world and the salvation of their souls in the next. It's said that King John stopped here on his way to Runnymede, signed the Magna Carta in 1215. The Ostrich Inn has received an honourable mention in many books due to its high levels of paranormal activity. It's been suggested that the activity is the result of the violent and gruesome acts carried out by a landlord who went by the name of Jarman and his wife in the 14th century. It's said that they would ply poor unsuspecting travellers with ale and wine, after which their victim would retire to the Blue Room to sleep off their excess. Once the unsuspecting victim was in bed, the Jarmans would pull a lever. This would open a trapdoor which would drop the man into a cauldron of scalding water, boiling him alive and drowning him to death. Naturally, the Jarmans would strip their unfortunate victim of all of their belongings, before disposing of their body in a nearby brook or stream. Legend has it that the Jarmans murdered over 60 wealthy travellers by way of this horrific torture. Their final victim was a clothier from Reading who went by the name of Thomas Cole. He had managed to stay at the inn on previous occasions without coming to any harm, and was a frequent visitor to the area. The Jarmans committed this murder after convincing Cole to write his will before he retired. His body was then found in the local brook, which is supposedly where the name Colnbrook comes from. The alarm was raised when Cole's donkey was found and instantly recognised by locals in the streets nearby. As a result, Mrs. Jarman was arrested and the gruesome contraption was discovered. Mr. Jarman was later apprehended in Windsor Forest. Whilst it is recorded that the couple were hung for their crimes, it does not specify exactly where they were executed. However, speculation suggests that they would have been taken to the infamous Tyburn. The phenomena has been reported over a period of many years, and includes sightings of ghostly apparitions, objects moving on their own, electrical appliances turning on and off, and doors opening and closing by themselves. Strange noises have also been heard in unoccupied areas within the building. Known as the Blue Room, or Room 11, guests can book to stay in this reportedly haunted room, sleeping in comfort, knowing that the trapdoor has since been sealed up. The manager of the Ostrich Inn, Sarah Morgan, has 14 years of experience dealing with the hauntings within. She said, "It's interesting, it adds an extra element. It's not just the run-of-the-mill. It's got those little stories. You're always waiting for something to happen." Sarah has had her fair share of spooky encounters. Years ago, I was locking up when I noticed somebody dressed in white over by the specials board. Sarah has also experienced the feeling of being poked in the back when down in the cellar. Ghost hunts, carried out in the pub, have often reported sightings of an old man sitting on his own by the bar, whilst others have experienced the sensation of falling when walking underneath room 11. The lady stayed here for a week. Every day her bags got bigger and bigger. She said she wasn't sleeping. When we went into her room to carry out housekeeping, she had placed towels over all of the pictures. She swore the pictures' eyes were moving and watching her. Another guest reported the feeling of somebody else sitting on the bed, and old-fashioned noises, including a horse and cart. Staff have reported the door to the kitchen often opening and closing on its own, followed by a thud in the kitchen. Sarah recounted her own experiences staying in the inn. I stayed in room 3, not a reportedly haunted one. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I swear out of the corner of my eye I saw somebody walk from one side of the room to the other. I felt the presence. Another time, in the infamous room 11, Sarah heard knocking on the wardrobe. However, when she went over and opened the wardrobe, the knocking moved to the other side of the room. Staff member Hayley Hearn recounted a sighting of a floating lady dressed in an old-fashioned white nightie and shoulder-length dark hair. As such, staff were shocked and terrified to learn that this description matched the outfit that Mrs. Jarman was executed in. What do you think? Is the Ostrich Inn haunted by the ghosts of Mr. and Mrs. Jarman and their many victims? Or are these just spooky tales spun from a history of murder and violence? Would you be brave enough to stay for a night in room 11 at the Ostrich Inn? Let us know in the comments section. That's all for today. I really hope these stories give you nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please help me out with the algorithm by clicking the thumbs up and subscribing to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.